It is never too late to save humanity.
To say today is the day.
Yes.
Today is the day that we will make a change.
Tune in to A Cleaner Future with Pollution Evolution.
We are your hosts,
Faith
and Kimberly, with our special guest today, Dylan Harrison.
If you want to follow us along on this journey, you can listen to Pollution Evolution every Saturday at 4 p.m. Central on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Deezer, and anywhere else you get your podcasts from. You can also join us on our Instagram at Pollution Evolution Podcast and at TikTok at Pollution Evolution for educational content, memes, and updates about some things we have coming. We actually have a very exciting project coming in a few weeks that we're going to be talking about probably next week.
Yeah.
So tune in for that.
So today we actually wanted to pivot from our planned topic. We were going to do microplastics.
We still will be.
Yes, we will be doing that. However, we want to cover a series of natural disasters that have occurred both locally and globally. For those of you who don't know, natural disasters have been ravaging across the world, and they're ramping up. So we thought that it was very important for us to discuss this.
Exactly. Before we dive into this topic today, we want to introduce our guest, who's my husband. This is Dylan. You want to talk to our listeners and tell them a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, my name's Dylan Harrison. I studied at West Texas A&M. I studied biology and wildlife and conservation. I have a passion for animals and for conservation as a whole. I just felt compelled to join based on all the natural disasters that have been going on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for being here.
Yeah.
So I guess let's go ahead and dive right in. Let's start by talking about what natural disasters are.
Natural disasters are major adverse events that result from natural processes. These include things like earthquakes, floods, wildfires, and hurricanes, and they can cause significant damage and loss of life, and also major environmental disruptions. Natural disasters have actually tripled in their harm to human life and material goods since the 1980s. They went from 300 to 900 since 2014 when this study was first conducted. And we're currently seeing that these issues are getting much worse due to changing climate. We can debate all day that we want the intricacies of climate change, but we cannot deny that we are seeing accelerated warming, accelerated events of magnitude that we are not seeing. We're literally getting historical storms, heat waves, and everything year after year after year, and continuing to ignore it is just a fool's game. And so that brings me into talking about how our new administration is actually responding to disasters. So under the Department of Government Efficiency, FEMA has experienced mass firings and has seen programs and grants completely frozen despite judges ruling that unconstitutional. These rulings have seen halts in emergency preparedness, homeland security, firefighting, and also, I don't know if you were aware, but FEMA also protects churches against terrorism and performs some tribal security measures. While this is a more complete list, we will only really be discussing emergency preparedness and firefighting today.
So, for those of you who don't know, FEMA is actually the people that respond to these natural disasters. They help them out. It was gutted days after the massive floods in Kentucky and West Virginia. It left hundreds displaced from their homes for extended periods of time. And on February 24th of this year, 2025, the NRDC reported tens of thousands were without drinking water. And many roads, they couldn't even get through the roads. NOAA has also seen severe cuts. And studies and reports that they have are on ocean, atmosphere, and coastal regions. They provide weather forecasts. They give severe storm warnings. They monitor the climate. They manage fisheries, and they support marine commerce. So NOAA does a lot of things for us. They do a lot of things. And so for them to be getting cuts alongside FEMA, it's very important to discuss this because this has implications for our environment and climate change. And climate change and our environment impact us as humans overall. So the major concern with these recent events is that there haven't been timely alarms and emergency response because people aren't reporting on it, like NOAA and FEMA. They don't have the resources, or they're not allowed to anymore.
This kind of government oversight is really affecting multiple people. Dylan has had experiences with the government, like, involved, like, oversight at his job. Do you want to, like, talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I work for a government-funded program, and as part of the new administration, we have been forced to no longer use an array of language, such as diversity, inclusion, anything really. On top of that, we're no longer allowed to use pronouns in any type of communication. We have to worry about ice raids. I mean, we had a whole talk on what to do if ice shows up. It's not great. It's really not great.
Yeah. And I guess our point is that currently we're living in a time where there is an increased need for education and oversight that is rapidly being defunded. So that's why we do episodes like this, to bring you education so we can better protect ourselves and our communities, even in the face of natural disasters or in terms of DEI or immigration issues. We can come together.
Yeah, so getting back to the natural disasters, there are various types, and as many people know, there's, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, but we want to go into the different types and the different areas that they affect. So geologically, we have earthquakes, landslides, volcanic eruptions, and for those of you who don't know, 13% of all the world's active volcanoes, there are 108 active volcanoes, so 13% of those are within the island country of Japan. And Japan has a population of 124.5 million, according to 2023 data. So they also have risks of tsunamis, and that's just the geological ones. Hydrologically, so water based, they have hurricanes, typhoons, cyclones, floods, and then on the opposite side of that, there's drought. And very sadly, a lot of regions in the United States right now are experiencing drought. The last category we have is atmospheric. So there can be tornadoes, wildfires, winter storms, and heat waves. And we're going to talk a little bit about what causes these natural disasters to occur, and a little bit about some of our personal experiences with natural disasters or just climate change in general.
So some of the causes of these natural disasters actually come from tectonic forcings. All of our continents and oceans exist on basically these little puzzle pieces that float on magma that move and shift throughout the year and like millennia. And we'll typically see a lot of those geologic and even some of the hydrologic ones occur due to tectonic forcing. But another major contributor to these events are changing climate and rapidly causing warming of the atmosphere, increasing rain events in some areas. Because I think a lot of people hear climate change and just think of like global warming, but actually global climate change just causes all weather patterns to intensify. So we live in a very warm area in Texas, so we're obviously going to experience a lot of drought, and that's why we see warming events. But like Kimberly mentioned, in Kentucky and Virginia, they're experiencing massive flooding. And again, when you are getting that much warm air in an already arid place, it essentially causes massive evaporation both from soil and plant and leaves things very dry and makes them very prone to wildfires. Now on to the man-made causes. Man-made causes can include fireworks sparks, unlit cigarettes or embers that haven't been fully put out yet, chains that are dragging on the road and sparking, fallen electrical poles, train sparks, and these are causes for wildfires. And man-made changes also include pollution, improper disposal of waste.
For excessively polluted areas, so areas that have a lot of pollution, typically like you would be able to see the pollution at that point. That is going to cause some natural disasters to occur because it affects the weather patterns. So some places it causes drought actually. by preventing rain to fall. So, Dylan, I don't know if you're familiar with Hereford.
A little bit.
So you know that they have a lot of cows, right?
Yeah.
So this is like the beef capital of the world. They have so much methane. I call it a methane bubble. But whenever I lived there, I don't think it rained once. And I lived there for months. And it's because in areas with a lot of pollution, it can actually cause like a barrier around a certain area if it's stagnant winds. And it can prevent rain from falling because the water is absorbing into so much particle that's in the air. So yeah, that's an interesting factoid. Now that we've talked about the different causes of natural disasters, let's talk about the impacts that they have. So Faith, would you like to cover these?
Yeah, we can start with habitat loss. So habitat loss is a major, major issue. Dylan was actually telling me about how habitat loss can affect animals and their migratory patterns. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so with habitat loss, we're going to start seeing more and more animals coming into cities, towns, etc. They're going to lose their place to live, they're going to lose their place to eat, and they're going to start interacting with humans a lot more. That also means that they're going to start searching for food in cities. The problem with this is when animals get comfortable around humans, they also tend to get aggressive as they see us as competitors for food. Competitors for food sources. So as it continues to lose and we lose their habitat and their ecosystem, we're going to start seeing a lot more negative animal interactions. They're going to start coming into towns more often, searching for food. They're going to be more aggressive because they are starving and have no other food. So it doesn't just affect us, it also affects these animals, which does affect us.
And then with that, the destruction of these animals' homes can happen in a multitude of ways. So with hydrologic events, we often see coastlines ruined, wetlands, estuaries, and coral reefs. And they are especially sensitive because a lot of keystone species live there, and a lot of species that help with water filtration and feeding us and are like essential parts of that ecosystem reside in these very sensitive spaces. And when you take away the food source because they've been their homes have been destroyed, that big predators that rely on them to eat them will be forced into those human areas, like Dylan says. And then also wildfires, if it is not a prescribed burning are burns that are done to actually get rid of that layer of leaf litter and foliage on the forest floor and to return it to the cycle as nutrients. But if it is not done like that and it is burning like completely out of control, it can destroy the soils and ruin the foliage there. There's a very fine, delicate balance in prescribed burning, and you need a red card. Like, don't burn illegally, please. Like, it's not worth it because you get things like the Smokehouse Creek fire, which we'll be touching on later, and you see things like the California fires, when a really good example of what happens when fires go completely out of control and why we should have fire safety. Another issue that causes a lot of wildfires that is both human and an environmental effect is monoculture forest. A lot of indigenous plants that were native to these areas were actually pulled up, and we had species planted here that were completely invasive, not native, and burn way easier and are not as hardy and resistant to fire. Because like Dylan was saying, a lot of plants have built-in like fire resistance because they expect fire. It's a normal part of the their growing process. They expect it to happen. And like places like the Konza Prairie Biological Research Center actually do prescribe burning there to study the effects and like actually get true research and data on why we should have these types of practices instead of allowing monoculture forests to be planted, improper like maintenance to be upkept for like power lines that can cause all of these things. And so with that, we also see tornadoes, and they completely decimate habitats, homes, infrastructure, businesses. Tornadoes literally come through and leave destruction in their path. And like when we were younger, we used to have tornado drills where we'd have to put books in our head and sit in the hallway And I always wondered, like, how the tornado could possibly withstand my little textbook. Like, how that was actually going to protect us. But, like, where we live in Tornado Alley, those are so common. I mean, Dill, you remember the tornado sirens going off regularly? They test them.
We have weekly tests for them.
Mm-hmm. Every Wednesday they blare, and then our dog used to howl at them.
Wednesdays at noon.
Mm-hmm.
Every week.
Flooding also has caused major groundwater contamination and major soil degradation. So when areas flood, it can remove up to 40% of the topsoil and lower productivity by that same amount. Due to its lower soil nutrients, because the topsoil is essentially like how we can grow all of our food. Without it, we would be a barren wasteland. And flooding also contaminates the groundwater, because once a flooding event happens, any areas that have leaky infrastructure, any pollutants or pipelines that have not been secured, any waste or refuse or trash or just anything that the water is like swishing through is getting picked up, and it's infiltrating into the groundwater, because typically these things are stored. And like in the state of Texas right now, there is a lot of leaking oil containers. We actually did a GIS project on it. It helped us graduate.
So all of this leads to a loss of overall biodiversity in these regions. And it also causes air and water pollution to increase. So the bad thing about natural disasters is they have an effect on the total environment. But it also has an effect on humans, obviously. And we want to touch on the emotional effects. So, victims of natural disasters report having PTSD, anxiety, depression, and other trauma-related disorders. So, there is even a term for it to describe the feelings that arise in people when environment changes so much that it negatively affects their quality of life. So, this term is solastalgia, and they, like I said, they coined the term because so many people go through it. I mean, I can't imagine the loss and the feeling of having loss like that. So it's very important to keep that in mind. If somebody has gone through a natural disaster, they're probably still grieving. I mean, like some of them, you can't take all of your kids' photos with you. Like those are important memories that are like horrible natural disasters take away from you. And that's why we wanted to touch on this today, is try to give people some more information as to what happens, and probably also some ways to protect yourself. So next we have physical effects of natural disasters. And the first is death and loss of life. And sadly, this is typically for people with issues that require them to have electricity for medical equipment. So like oxygen machines, people with pacemakers that are like specifically, like they have specific ones, you know, diabetes monitors, like all kinds of things. Those affect people in their day-to-day life. And if they don't have access to renewing those or even maintaining those, then how can they survive? So natural disasters also expose you to all kinds of hazards. So it can expose you to chemicals. As Faith said, there are leaky oil tanks. In addition to those leaky oil tanks, if there is a tank of any chemical that has not been restored or taken care of over time, and typically, at least from our study, a lot of these tanks are really old. Like some of them were like 1960s, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
It was pretty far back, and I remember looking at that and I was like, that cannot be right. But it's a situation. Not all of the time are these things maintained, and whenever there is, for example, a flood, if there's too much pressure on that tank, it's going to crack. And those chemicals can go into the water. So don't be swimming in the flood water, especially because there's also other hazards. Like the winds pick up whenever it's flooding, typically. And so that's going to be carrying a lot of debris into the atmosphere, into the like yards, into everywhere.
Yeah, metal, sharp sticks, rebar, like very dangerous things that you do not want to potentially get on your body.
Yeah. And so We also want to touch on food and water shortages. So these happen typically during natural disasters because everybody's trying to prepare themselves, of course. But we've seen toilet paper is the first thing to go.
Mm-hmm. Water.
Let's see. Canned goods.
Anything like non-perishable.
Yeah, but I always think toilet paper is the one everybody freaks out on. I don't know why. I understand, but I don't think the toilet paper is going to keep you alive.
Yeah, I think the best thing to do, like, with food and water shortages is always just being prepared beforehand and having, like, 72 hours of food, water, supplies, like clothing, first aid, lights, maps, radios, things to, like, get news just in case, like, you lose power and you can't get to your kitchen, like, or if the water treatment facility goes down and you can't turn your tap on to get water, you have to be able to have clean water. And if you don't have a drinking water supply, you can also get something like a Life Straw, iodide tablets, or even make your own water filter. If you go to episode 1 references, we put a DIY water filter in there that you literally just need a plastic bottle, rocks, and sand for to filter everything out. So that's like our biggest piece of advice, because food and water shortages unfortunately are going to become more and more common, because we're seeing an increase in natural disasters, and each year the frequency is getting higher and higher and higher, and we're really beginning to realize that being prepared is not like a suggestion anymore. It's like you almost have to.
Yeah, even in regions like inner parts of the United States, you don't, like, places where you don't expect to have natural disasters, like that expectation is out the window.
Yeah, like in North Carolina.
So alongside these natural disasters, heat waves pose a significant risk for human health. As we've talked about, global warming, climate change is typically referred to as global warming because it's warming at a significant rate. And due to this increased warming, it can increase drought conditions, and it is very dangerous for you to be outside if there is a heat wave. If there is a heat wave, you can have a heat stroke, you can get dizzy, you can pass out, like all of these things. And according to the World Meteorological Organization, the number of casualties due to extreme temperature grew 2,300% between 1991 and 2000. That's 9 years. And 2001 to 2010 as well, being by far the greatest growing rate among climate-related disasters. These numbers are much higher in areas that experience the heat island effect. And Faith, would you like to touch on that?
Yeah, so the heat island effect is a phenomenon that's typically observed in urban cities, and it's seen in areas that have a high amount of impervious concrete versus green spaces like little green strips on the lawn, parks, and things of that nature. And it causes heat to become trapped and almost act like an island within the area, and you can literally see temperatures 10 to 20 degrees hotter in those areas. And in summertime, those heat island effects could make it feel like 120 to 130 in places, because in the summer we regularly get 110, 115 degree days. It's very, very common. It always happens July and August and like the beginning of September are just absolutely brutally hot, and anyone who lives in these areas or that is unhoused in those areas is facing the brunt of that. And it's also like a racial issue too, because you typically see places with lack of green spaces, there's a direct correlation between the race of the people that live there. So with these heat effects, like, we also have to consider the like socioeconomic piece to it too, because it's not just an environmental one.
Yeah. So economically, obviously, all of these natural disasters can damage infrastructure. The damage is going to be dependent on how strong the storm is. And as Faith said, these are increasing in severity. So the damage is increasing as well. Homes lost, they can be lost due to wildfires, flooding, anything, any type of natural disaster. I can personally say when we bought our house, they were like, oh, you don't need natural disaster prevention, like insurance. And I said, I am getting it. Like, 100%. I don't care. Because, like, it's not that you don't need it, because you never know when it could happen to you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the biggest thing I think that we want everybody to like get out of this is because the climate is changing the way that it is, you have to be prepared.
Yeah, because it's like you keep watching these events and then they get closer and closer till they're at your front door. I mean, we literally had wildfires raging less than 50 miles away from us.
Mm-hmm.
And the region that we all used to live in has experienced devastating wildfires after devastating wildfires and currently have multiple actively burning there.
Mm-hmm.
And so our friends and family are those people being affected, and like Kim was saying, we like just have to be aware and like be able to adequately prepare and protect our families and our communities, because as we stated before, a lot of the people that typically do that protection and response are being defunded, and people that are supposed to help, like insurance companies, they've actually been found a lot of times to subvert or not fully fulfill those claims. We've seen it a lot, like in the Maui fires. People still have not gotten their homes or their insurance claims filled. I was reading the news about that. We know people that have lost their homes and they're still homeless. They still haven't been able to rebuild, even though they have insurance. Like, it's just a lot of issues. And with that, like losing your homes, you see a lot of mass migrations out of these areas, and a lot of these areas people can't leave. Like, it's really dependent on financial reasons, or if you have a disability, if you're taking care of somebody that has a disability, it might not just be as quick as like, okay, there's a category 5 hurricane coming, we have to go, because you might not really be able to do that. So it's also the privilege aspect of it. So like economically, if you aren't in a good financial position, evacuating for wildfires really might not be an option, or evacuating for hurricanes, floods, or any of these issues genuinely might not be an option, and you will become victim to those health effects we just mentioned. Natural disasters can also hinder globalization efforts by stopping the flow of information and technologies into other countries. So, say for instance, China experienced a massive natural disaster that stopped them from getting out their battery components that are powering a lot of the solar panels that we use, or a lot of the solar panels, for instance. And those solar panels were going to some place to provide them with energy, but now it's being delayed. So not only has the people of China been affected by this massive event, whatever it may be, but the people that were relying on that tech or information to get to them now no longer have it and must be delayed. So it's just like this huge interconnected process, and like nothing happens in a bubble. Like even if it's happening in California and you live in New York, the ramifications, you're still feeling it economically, socially, emotionally, because like as a country we're all hurting for our citizens, and it's heartbreaking to see them lose their homes like that, and also worse to know that it could come for you at any point. Dill, do you have any questions about what we just discussed?
So I know that natural disasters occur, but I mean, how likely is it going to affect me? How frequent do they happen?
According to the National Centers for Environmental Health, over the past 20 years, the U.S. has experienced 292 extreme weather events. And I put that in quotations because they identify extreme weather events as anything that the damages amount to at least $1 billion. So anything above that. Anything else isn't reported in this specific map. So 292 extreme weather events. And the cost for damages amounted to $2.26 trillion.
Wow.
For those approximate 300 extreme weather events. And that's not even accounting for the smaller cities or the smaller fires or events that weren't reported because they didn't have as much damage.
So does that answer your question, or do you have any
That's
follow-ups?
scary.
Yeah.
So to add to that as well, since 1980, Texas, Louisiana, and Florida have had the highest cost of natural disasters. So these high-cost natural disasters typically have drastic events for people and the environment, as Faith discussed. The concern, however, is that recently these natural disasters have increased in intensity, frequency, and the effect on climate change. So whenever there is significant pollution, like water pollution or air pollution due to these natural disasters, it can, like we've talked about before, it can travel.
And with the traveling of these natural disasters and the increase in intensity and the increasing frequency, it kind of leaves the question of what do we do and how can we even begin to fight back against these things? Mm-hmm. The best thing we can do to fight back against these increasingly intense storms and disaster events is to fight climate change, because ultimately that is what is exacerbating them, increasing the frequency, increasing the intensity, and it's almost like putting a band-aid on something if we don't tackle the root cause. Mm-hmm. And the root cause is changing climate, because ultimately that's what's increasing the frequency of our like really hot days and days above 100 degrees. That's ruining biodiversity. Mm-hmm. And also, like, humans aren't helping. Human perturbations are another factor, and like we as people really need to check ourselves and begin to realize, like, it's not just as simple as like stopping like using a reusable bag. It's much deeper. It's like not buying from companies that are causing this high level of pollution, not supporting people or entities that you know are directly lobbying to fossil fuel groups, not voting for candidates that have shown that they are not committed to changing climate and green energy and a green future for us. Like, there's so much we can do with our dollars, our votes, and our voices, and I don't want you guys to like get sad or get lonely and think that like you can't make a difference as one person, because ultimately there's so many of us that if we all say like, no, we demand better, we do not want our houses on fire, we do not want to be flooded out, and you need to change, they will.
Mm-hmm, they have to. I mean, if we all come together as a collective, like, communities have to take the initiative to say, like, we've had enough and we're going to do better for ourselves, mm-hmm. even if the cities won't do it for them. Exactly. You know, like, you have to push to protect your communities, your families. It's really sad that you have to, but you have to.
Yeah, because the things and people that are in place too, they are genuinely doing their best, but they are being defunded. Mm-hmm. They are being overstretched. Workers are being fired left and right, and there's only so much that they can do to help us. We have to help ourselves too. Yeah. We have to help them help us.
Exactly.
And not to scare you, but just to encourage you that like we have so much more power than we ever believe, and like there's no need to live in fear of these things, because we can still change them. Like global climate change, we can always begin that day to decide to change. We can mm-hmm. always begin that change at any point. It is never too late to save humanity.
To say today is the day.
Yes.
Today is the day that we will make a change.
Mm-hmm. Even if it's a little one. Even if it's just mm-hmm. like boycotting somebody that you know is like heavy in the oil industry or fossil fuel industry or mm-hmm. blase.
Yeah. So now that we've talked about all of that, let's talk about some notable natural disasters that probably weren't shown on the map that we had previously. As we discussed, the Smokehouse Creek fire impacted the entire panhandle. It actually went across multiple states. It burned more than 1 million acres of land. At one point, it cut off all exiting routes to my hometown. So anybody who had not evacuated was essentially trapped. Even though I wasn't there, I was getting updates throughout the time, and it was terrifying. Mm-hmm. I mean, what do you do when you're in a city completely surrounded by fire? Like, it's, yeah. And the sad thing is there was also another wildfire yesterday. Mm-hmm. They still don't know what caused it, but it got really close to one of the industrial facilities. Like, I think it was at the fence, actually. That's what the fire maps showed. And I saw somebody comment on one of these, the posts about the wildfire, and they said, as a person from Fritch who has been through wildfires before, this is my advice to you. And she gave, like, a whole paragraph of, like, this is what you need to prepare. Like, if you lose everything, just know people will be there for you. And it was really touching, but also sad, because how many times do you go through an event for you to be like, oh, I know confidently what to do. You know?
Yeah, it's heartbreaking because you realize, like, it's become so normal to that town to experience life or death each year that they've accepted it as the norm. Because we shouldn't just accept this as the norm.
Yeah, like, this is happening because of because of what we've done as humans.
Yeah, because that, like, humans drive climate change. Like, yes, the climate changes over, like, long geospatial scales. Like, I'm talking millions of years, but those changes are very slow and minute. What we've actually done from the Industrial Revolution until now has literally never been demonstrated in human history unless it has literally been a mass extinction event. Like, I'm talking the asteroids, like, hitting the Earth. Like, that's, like, the only relative thing I could say, because everything else happens so gradually over a time span that it's nothing as instantaneous as what we've done. And I think it's just really heartbreaking how we, like, such a planet that can live for billions of years, brought to its knees by humans that have only been alive for such a small part of its history.
Yeah.
And with that, that brings me to a hurricane that recently affected the state of Texas. It was called Hurricane Beryl, and it happened in 2024 in the summer. And it was the earliest Category 5 hurricane in history. Texas does have a hurricane season. As Kim mentioned, we have experienced innumerable amounts of losses and natural disasters all throughout the states. We have Tornado Alley here, the wildfires here, the hurricanes there, and then drought and extreme flooding mixed in all throughout the state.
I have a question for you both. So what is the significance of having a Category 5 hurricane happen so early?
It means that so you know how there's seasons?
Yeah.
Well, the seasons have patterns on, like, in the atmosphere and in the water cycle. And whenever that season essentially is affected, then that makes it to where hurricanes can happen earlier. So it's kind of like an indication that the seasons have changed so drastically.
And that patterns have shifted, kind of like how we mentioned with the different, like, circulations. Those circulations are kind of governing those like, that seasonality, and they are the driving force around a lot of, like, systems that exist on the planet that we don't even question, like El Nino, La Nina, and stuff like that. And so, yeah, that storm coming early is a scary indicator for what those circulations are actually doing and how they're actually reacting, and relative to, like, where they were maybe, like, 20 to 30 years ago.
That is scary.
And something that may have influenced that being so early is, I don't know if you know about the polar vortex. So for our listeners and viewers who don't know, this is where a lot of pollution gets trapped. A lot of heat gets trapped because it's literally a spinning vortex. And it spins in a circle almost infinitely because it's really hard for anything to get out of it. But whenever something gets out of it, it pushes so fast that it can shift everything so fast, like immediately almost.
So Faith, I know you talked about the Smokehouse Creek fire, but, like, is that the only one? Are there others?
Oh, yeah, there's multiple. A really big notable one happened in California this year. The California wildfires and the straight line winds was actually declared an emergency on January 8th until January 31st, 2025. And these fires were absolutely devastating, and they were some of the deadliest in U.S. history. We have family that lives in California that was affected by these fires. And it was truly devastating not knowing if they were going to be safe the next day or if we were going to get a call that they burned during the night. And it's a reality that we're becoming really intimate with because we have a lot of friends and family that live in these fire-prone areas. So each fire season or dry season, which is... We've been in dry season for months. It hasn't rained in Austin in a long time. I think cumulatively we've gotten 9 inches of rain in 8 months, guys.
It's dry.
It's very dry. And so it's just really scary because not only is it happening to our friends and family, I'm really just counting down the days we get the red warnings and we have to go. Because it's getting closer and closer, and we've been under fire watch for multiple days.
Yeah.
So, it's just very ongoing. And there's a lot of lesser known fires that have also been declared states of emergency in Oklahoma, Texas, Kentucky. But again, since they don't cause $1 billion worth of damage, they are not reported in the mainstream.
So with all this doom and gloom, let's bring some light to the conversation. Let's talk about how you can donate to people that are working these natural disasters. So obviously you can't re-employ these people at FEMA or NOAA, but you can petition. You can write petitions. You can try to get them their jobs back. I mean, without them, what are we to do? We really, really need them because they're like the people looking out for us at the end of the day whenever these natural disasters happen. Another thing you can do is donate to your local fire department. It is very important because fire departments, typically their funds are really, really small. Like, they don't really get paid very much.
And they always try to get cut from funding, too.
Yeah.
It was on the ballot this year.
Yeah, they try to get rid of one of the firefighting stations down the street. I said, I said absolutely not. Not in my neighborhood.
NIMBY.
But one thing that I do want to know is that firefighters, not all of them are on-duty firefighters. Like, not all of them are full-time firefighters. Sadly, the sad reality is that for some of these California wildfires, there were incarcerated individuals that were working these wildfires. On January 14th of 2025, the High Country News reported, and I quote, "As of Monday, almost 900 incarcerated firefighters have been deployed to fight the devastating and deadly wildfires tearing through Los Angeles County. In California, hundreds of incarcerated people help fight wildfires year-round, earning a maximum of $10.24 per day, plus an additional $1 per hour during emergencies."
So these men are essentially risking their lives to protect us and fight these fires, and they're literally getting paid what we make in 20 minutes of work.
Yeah, that's insane.
It is insane. And it makes me sick just because they're incarcerated. We don't even know what they're in there for.
And like, sorry to stop you, but in this article as well, I read that they interviewed somebody who actually fought fires. Like, that was his job in the prison, and he didn't even get paid $10 per day. He was like, I was surprised that you even said that figure was real. Like, what do you like? It's
legalized slavery, essentially, because the 13th Amendment literally made it legal to keep slaves in the prison system. So they're essentially using slave labor to fight fires. Look it up, read about the 13th Amendment, watch the show on Netflix. It's a really great resource, but we definitely, need to recognize the role that does play. It is legalized slavery. Because a lot of these men, in order to do this, they have to be non-violent offenders. And a lot of them, won't be able to be a firefighter once they leave. They won't hire them, even though these are the men that saved the communities that they're applying for. Another great list and resource is found on the National Voluntary Organization Active in Disasters website. We will include the website linked in the show notes for you, or in our references document and our link tree on Instagram, so follow it. And it contains a list of all current organizations that provide disaster relief that are reputable and legitimate and not scammy, because obviously it is really sad that people most definitely take advantage of disasters to scam people. So we have provided that resource. So if you want to find somebody in your local community or find a disaster relief fund for something near and dear to your heart, you can go to that list as well.
Yeah. So with that, I think that's the end of our episode. Thank you, Dylan, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
For all of our viewers, stay tuned. Next week, we will get back on track.
Yes.
And we will do microplastics next week.
But again, we just wanted to share this because it's been a crazy week watching all of these fires happen in front of us, and we really just want to bring awareness to these issues so we can better protect ourselves.
Yeah, and so that other people can better protect themselves as well.
Exactly. And with that, we will see you next week to learn how microplastics affect human health and development.
Yeah. All right. See you there. Bye.
Bye.
So now that we've talked about different types of natural disasters, let's talk about what causes.
skip ahead and come back to this section.
No,